Elementary music teacher friend, you love what you do, but you might feel unappreciated and, in fact, unseen some days. You may even feel like you're on a music teacher island and just want to connect with other music teachers who can relate to both your struggles and wins when it comes to teaching elementary music. I get you and understand completely the feelings you're having. That's why each and every week, the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast will provide you with solo and guest episodes that will help you realize you're not alone in your music teaching journey. Throughout each episode, my goal is for you to be able to walk away with actionable steps and ideas to help you feel like you're ready to take on the new week with whatever challenges may be thrown your way. Hi, I'm your host, Jessica Peresta, and I'm so glad you're here. Whether you're at home, in your car, in the shower, or wherever else you're listening, grab your cup of coffee or whatever other beverage is nearby and listen in to the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast. Welcome back to the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast. Today, I am joined by Nate Holder. He does amazing work, and we were actually talking before we hit record about we met years ago online, and so this is long overdue, like long overdue, and I'm super excited. So, Nate, before we get into all that, just let everybody know a little bit about yourself and the work you do in music education.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Nate, and I'm excited to be here. It's great to speak to you, Jessica. So my work, what I basically do, I do many different things really. So I've written a few books in the last few years. The first one came out in 2018, and there's been 4 more since then. Just got a lot done during the pandemic. A lot of gigs were cancelled. I'm a musician. That's what I was doing before the pandemic hit. And then, and in being a musician, I was performing. I was fortunate to play around Europe. Fortunate to come over to the States a couple of times as well. Middle East as well. I've had great times with great people making some great music. And then obviously the pandemic destroyed everything.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, it's crazy. But in addition to being a musician and meeting lots of different people and playing different places, you start to see the world slightly differently when you travel and realizing, how different people interact with different kinds of music and thinking about how it was, when I was at school and the music that I grew up with and the skills that I learned in school that most of them I don't even use now in my professional career. And then in the teaching that I would do, working with kids as young as 4 or 5, and then I'm working in primary schools and sometimes in secondary schools, just really started to think about the different ways that we learn and the different things that sometimes we're missing when we learn in school. And so when the pandemic hit, that's when a lot of the work that I was doing, but writing about what it means to music education and this idea of, colonization and how that's affected music education, the work that I'd started to do, I'd written some articles in the past few years before the pandemic hit. But not having any playing work just allowed me to really dive into that a little bit more, much more really, and started to write a lot. And I set up my blog. And then from there, I started doing a lot of CPD sessions and a few mini conferences here and there and speaking and panels, et cetera. And then these books came along to kind of go with the overall theme of really trying to bring diversity and inclusion and equality, equity, all of these things, really trying to change how we see music education and ask questions that, I think maybe I had when I was a kid, but didn't really have the people to talk to about it or have the vocabulary and in many different things that other people have been thinking, in the last, 5, 10, 20 years, and just trying to bring things all together in a way. So I think, many different things, but ultimately it's all about just trying to help people, for one, enjoy music, in my as a musician, just give them an escape from everyday life, and then on the other side of it, it's really trying to bring as much equity to music education as possible.
Love it. Oh my goodness, Nate, I love everything you said, and we're going to unpack that. I was talking to you before we started recording about, and I can't remember the exact date, but you and I met online years ago. I feel like just randomly, just kind of found each other's work. And I told you, I am so blown away in a good way by all the work you've put out there and the books you've written and how you have just pivoted even during COVID. And that's when you were able to work more on the things you're passionate about. And so we were kind of talking about, how did we meet? I don't even remember, but Yeah, I've supported you from day one, and it's really cool to see how far you've come and how your work has developed. And we were kind of talking about the fact that when you start in a business, or you want to
Mhm.
do something you're passionate about, it will take twists and turns, and you don't know the direction it's going to go. But it
Mhm.
is kind of sometimes just about taking that first step, and they're like, okay, I kind of like this step. Now I'm going to continue down this path, or I'm going to go this way instead. So I want to talk about diversity in music education. And I know this is such a huge passion of yours. It's a passion of mine as well. And I'm so excited to talk about this. What does diversity in music education mean to you?
I think on a fundamental level, it means having options, right? It means being able to give a child or a young person or an adult, right? It doesn't matter which any age,
Mm-hmm.
the ability to choose what they want to do. And even if they're not able to choose what they want to do for many different reasons, right? It's also about making sure that what you're giving them has a range of different components to it. Not just one kind of way to see, and not just one thing of giving them this thing of music education, and actually when you zoom out of it, it's this very, very narrow idea of what music can be, or what it was in a particular period of time, for example, right? And in that, in giving people the options, and giving them a diverse, I don't like using the word to try and define what it is, right? But we're looking at people from different ethnicities, people from with different abilities, people with different sexual orientations. You know what I mean? It's just different people who have made different music, different parts of the world over different time periods. If we have access to records and recordings, because there's a lot of music that we for many different reasons we can't hear what it sounded like, because there's no
Mm.
recordings, so there's no written records. There might be writings about it, but we don't know exactly what it sounded like. But even that's fascinating as well, right? To imagine what it might have been like in, I don't know, 16th century
Yeah.
Mongolia, based on writings that we find, or depictions of music in ancient Egypt, and what that music might have sounded like, what instruments they had at the time, because we have records about that, right? So it's about,
Yeah.
I think, at the end of it, if we're talking about children, especially when they leave school, maybe at the age of 15, 16, they have a wide knowledge of many different musics from different parts of the world, and they've had the ability to dive into whichever one that they feel like they want to dive into. But there's lots of problems with that, because this thing called standardized testing
Mm.
really kind of stops a lot of teachers from being able to do that, because you have to make sure that they're learning certain things to pass certain grades and to move on, and etc etc. So yeah, we would love to be able to have many, many more options, but also we don't want to put, I say we, you know
Yeah.
teachers are under a lot of stress as well, right? So how are teachers able to do that themselves? So there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of people who are involved in music education, whether it's publishers.
Mm-hmm.
We have music hubs over here. I think you don't have the same system in the States, right? But we have organizations who kind of look after lots of different schools and supply teachers, etc. Training, and who's training teachers, and what are they training the teachers to deliver. There's so many people involved. And
Yeah.
again, even talking about diversity, who's training the teachers, right? Because that has an impact on how they receive music and how they teach music. So it goes right up and down the chain.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's really important to look at these many different aspects of how music is delivered and how it's taught, who's teaching it. And because I think once we kind of have more of a balance, then we'll start to see a change in how we see music education.
Yeah. That is such a good point. When you were talking, I was thinking back to my college music education program, and you're
Mm.
right. It's taught by the perspective of the professor, who maybe that's all they've ever known either. Maybe that's what they've been taught, so they're teaching it. And maybe their teacher was taught that, so they're teaching it. And it's not necessarily wrong, but I completely agree that there needs to be more diversity for sure in teacher training. And so I've kind of like racked my brain around how does that happen, especially in the college level. Is it
Mm.
bringing in guest teachers to help with that? Maybe they don't have anybody on staff, or is it making sure that they are, yeah, if they just don't know how to get the ball rolling with making sure their curriculum they're teaching these college students is more diverse? Is it just looking for help and bringing in people who do know? Is that part of it, do you think?
Yeah, I think, in thinking about all of this, I think one of the things that kind of came up for me was this idea of ego.
Mm,
And I think sometimes we have to let go of our own egos to say, well, I'm a specialist in this area of music, um, and I know some bits of this, so therefore I'm going to do that, rather than giving up responsibility, or giving a bit of giving responsibility to someone from the outside, right? Someone who's a
right.
professional musician in another genre, or even to students as well, right? This idea of students leading the learning themselves. There's lots of things that students know that teachers don't know. So how can teachers kind of remove themselves from being the arbiter of knowledge, and empowering the students to share their knowledge, not only to the teacher but to everyone else in the class as well.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, so how can we remove ego? I think that's a big thing.
That is so
um
good. It's so good. I mean, I'm thinking about my own music teacher membership. There have been times where I wanted to have a conversation and I knew I was not the person to have the conversation. I'm bringing someone in
mm,
to have it with me or for me because I think it is. You don't have to be the expert in everything. And it's okay to admit that you don't know all
mm.
the answers and you don't know everything, even if you're a college professor. So I love that. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about how can music teachers make their music classes more equitable for the students they teach. This could go a lot of different directions and it's pretty loaded,
Yeah,
but just some ideas that come to mind about how to do that.
I think it all starts with the teachers themselves, right? So before you're trying to find books or resources or podcasts or anything like that, I think it starts with teachers really thinking about who they are, and what training they've had, and how that's affected how they teach, right? I think it all starts from there, because it's very easy to kind of just to find a resource online and say, oh, I'm just going to teach that and make it diverse, but how you present that information is going to be tainted by your experiences. Not to say the experiences are
Hmm.
bad or negative,
Right.
it's just that that's what they are, right?
Yeah.
So I think it all has to start from there, just understanding who you are, understanding where you've come from, and seeing where the holes in your knowledge are. And then
Hmm.
by you learning, and then again by being able to say to students, I don't know, because I think that's something teachers, you can't say I don't know to the
Hmm.
students. You're not supposed to be in that position, right?
Yeah.
um but again, if you can allow for time for students to to explore and to share their own experiences of a particular kind of music, or their favorite music, or whatever it is, then we start to diversity starts to happen without you even doing much. It
Hmm.
starts to happen without you having to. You can step back, and more diverse ideas and music will come out just by the virtue of the fact that you give students more time to talk, right?
Hmm.
And then obviously there's so many resources out there, and people are developing more all the time that can help you. Lots of CPD sessions that are happening, lots of Facebook groups to join, and I think there's lots that the UK can probably learn from the US in terms of resources and how things are done and organizational stuff, I think, and perhaps the same,
Hmm.
from the US to the UK as well. So I think it's important to have those international conversations too, because end of the day, if you listen to the Beatles in America or in England, it sounds the same, right? You know what
Right.
I mean?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
there might be different standards and different pedagogies, etc., and different kids in the classroom, but at the end of the day, the music is the music. So, and also I think it's important to think about who's in your classroom as well, and understand that every child has different needs, which can be a tough thing to think about, right? Like, how do you service every single child in your class? But I think it's possible to at least try, if you have a really clearer idea of who's in the classroom, and where the
Hmm.
overlaps are, and what the cultures are, and who might feel marginalized in society in general, and bringing that into the classroom, and you know what I mean. So at least music
Yeah.
lessons might be that one place in the whole school day where they feel recognized as a person of with particular origin, or
Hmm.
sexual orientation, or whatever it is.
One thing I talk to music teachers about a lot is you have to get to know your students. You have to know the school you work at. You have to know the neighborhoods they come from. You can't teach the same at one school that you can teach at a different school. And the same thing is if you have 6 fourth grade classes, you're going to teach all of the classes differently as well. It goes back, like you said, know your students, know the diversity. And I also love that you touched on let your students teach you. They have so much value to bring. Just ask them, what kind of music do you like listening to? Why do you enjoy listening to this? Mm-hmm. Well, you could even do like a research project around the music they like to listen to and see maybe they don't even know the history or origins of rap or R&B or whatever it might be. And so exploring that with them is so important. And I think a lot of times when music educators sometimes step out of the teacher role and go into more of the facilitator role, where they're facilitating, like you said, conversations going on and facilitating, I really am going to give students choice. That is so important. And like you said, it will just naturally happen where students will feel comfortable in your classroom and conversations will naturally start happening. And then in return, you're going to see that you're able to teach more music because classroom management issues are not going to be as much because you're really starting to reach the kiddos that you are teaching. So touching on all of that was so super important. And when having conversations with others, teachers about diversity, I'm sure you've had some conversations by now. What are some misconceptions or maybe things you wish music teachers would understand a little bit better?
I think a lot of teachers sometimes are afraid to do research themselves. Like sometimes it comes across that, it's like, give me a list of stuff, like where can I find stuff? And I think it's this misconception that the work is going to be done by being spoon-fed, lists and websites and, this is a lesson plan, so go ahead and do this now. I think that's a big one. I think it is really about, is about learning / relearning, undoing. It's about all of that. And that's something I really try and focus on when I do sessions and so on. It's just to remind people that I'm not here to give you a list of stuff to go and do, or a package scheme of work to go and deliver for the next 6 months. It's kind of giving you the ideas about what are possible, the things that are possible, and then hopefully giving you some tools that you can go away and design what you need to do for your students, for your kids, for your area, for your country, for specific incidents that might happen in your country or your area, or even inside your school, right?
Yeah.
Because just having a list of, for example, 10 Native American musicians, if you're in Oregon or if you're in Florida, they might have different significances in different parts of the country.
Right.
So, that's not necessarily going to solve a problem if that is a problem that you need to have solved, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's definitely one thing. That's probably one of the biggest ones, actually.
Yeah, I know what you mean. There's certain teachers out there, and this is not name calling or making you feel bad at all, but it is sometimes about, okay, I taught a song from Germany. Check that off the list. Instead of, making it meaningful and really understanding. Think about the why behind why you're teaching the music you're teaching. Don't just say, okay, I'm going to pick one from each, whatever. And I'm guilty of that. My first year teaching, I remember doing that. I was told, teach music from around the world. So I was like, all right, we're going to tackle this one song a month, and I'm going to pick one from each country. And then it was like you said, it's about relearning. And I was like, whoa, that is not, like, I don't even know the meanings of the songs I was teaching or why I was teaching them or where they came from or the history or origin. It was just about, or even if the kids in my classroom were relating to this music, was there anyone in there from Germany? Probably not. Like, maybe 1 or 2 kids, but it just became, and then I shifted my focus where teaching music from around the world is still so important, but it's about the delivery of it. It doesn't have to be once a month, And also one of the biggest issues I've seen, which I'm sure you've seen this too, is teachers kind of just being stuck in their ways and it doesn't matter if they're a first year teacher or have been teaching 30 years. It's, I'm going to do it this way. Maybe it is that conversation we had earlier where this is how I was taught, or maybe it's just a matter of, maybe it's just fear behind it where they're not quite sure how to take certain songs out of their curriculum or to, like you said earlier also, where they can let their students teach them songs or have conversations. So maybe they've always done things a certain way. So that's where their comfort zone is. So they're afraid to change it up and to do it differently. Do you see that as well with teachers you have taught to?
Yeah, the fear is real because, and I always say this, teachers are amazing. Like it's not about saying, you know, you have to stop everything that you've done in the past is absolutely wrong and terrible and you need to start from scratch. It's like,
Right.
no, you're amazing at what you do, like full stop. How can we make it better? You know, how can we help? You know, if we've shown you something that you haven't thought of before, you know, we understand that this isn't something that we can just change overnight. You know, if you've been teaching for 20, 30 years, it's going to be very difficult because you're probably used to, you know, doing the same material every year, potentially.
Yeah.
You know, you've got your system set up, you've got your resources set up. So, you know, one small thing to say, well, we can't do this anymore can throw everything off, right? So it's important, you know, that in trying to, you know, essentially make things better for students, for our world, right? We're not beating teachers over the head, and teachers don't feel like they can't do. It's just about saying, well, maybe some of the things need to change because we've looked at histories and maybe, you know, educators have been talking about it, but we've just ignored them for different reasons. Maybe there are marginalized communities who haven't been brought into the classroom for many different reasons. But if we're going to do something, I think we should start doing things now, right? It's always the best time, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if we're going to do it, let's do it. And you know, there is support for you wherever you need it. There is, you know,
right.
And you don't have to feel like we all make mistakes. We're all human.
Yeah.
And that's, again, something really important to kind of get across, that if you make a mistake, you know, I'm not a fan of cancel culture and all of this, right? You make one mistake and, you know, people get rid of it. It's like, no,
right. No, I'm in agreement with that.
We learn and we improve. And obviously if there are some who keep making, you know, mistakes, but they don't see them as mistakes, that's a different matter. But I firmly believe that there are 9.5 music teachers out of 10 are very, very open and very, very willing and very happy, and they're really, really passionate about making music as a safer place and as beneficial place for their kids as possible. Like, that's bottom line.
Yeah, I completely agree. And no, I agree with the cancel culture thing. I get frustrated a lot. I have to stay off social media sometimes because I get frustrated when I do see a teacher asking a question. Authentically, really, they're wanting to change and they're maybe asking that question of how to change. And then you see the person, instead of giving an answer, maybe not doing the research for them, but just saying, here's where you can do more research, or here's whatever it might be, helping them go down that path. They just get mad and they're just immediately like jumping down their throat. Like, how do you not know this by now? These Facebook groups have been around. Well, maybe that person just started doing the work. Maybe just help them, send them to a Facebook group, send them to a podcast, send them to a free resource that would help them, or whatever it is, a blog, whatever. And then let them do the work from there. But I agree, like the cancel culture. And then I feel like people having a heart to help is what's going to help so much as well. Just the getting angry that certain teachers have the best intentions, but maybe they just have never done it a different way and they just don't know how. And I think that is super helpful to have a heart willing to help and willing to share what works is what's going to help the momentum move a little bit.
I would say as well, though, I do think there are a lot of people, teachers online who are feeling, I mean, there's a lot of trauma that has happened, right? And I think sometimes it's not that they don't have the tools to talk to people in possible. It's just sometimes, and this work it's been really emotional, to be very honest with you. Like, there's been times when I felt overwhelmed, I felt emotional talking about things, you know, when we see things in the news and everything, it can get to you. And I think sometimes it's just it's just that emotion that's built up and someone asks a question and it just triggers you, not because that person is doing anything wrong. It's just because there's a lot, you know, that we're trying to deal with on a day-to-day basis, you know. And then you add into everything that's happened, the pandemic, etc. Right? It's I think the last year and a half, you know, 2 years almost now, have just been traumatic for so many people, in many different ways. And I think sometimes that's what comes out, where, you know, finally for many Black and brown people actually feeling like can speak openly about certain things, and then someone asks a question and knowing it's not necessarily coming from a bad place, it's just in this moment right now, it's just not what some want to hear or need to hear, right? And I think sometimes that's what comes out. And I think it's you know, I think things will get better over time for sure. But I think it is important to acknowledge that there is a lot of hurt that has happened, a lot of gaslighting that has gone on, you know, for years. And finally, certain communities can feel freer to speak about things that have happened to them, and sometimes it comes out in those ways. And I think we all need to understand that and understand that it's, again, 9.5 times out of 10, it's coming from a good place. It's just, we're human and we react and we have emotion, and sometimes, how it is, having a conversation like this face to face or on, audio is different to typing. And sometimes you've seen it, right? People will type something and someone will take one word and blow this up, and it gets really messy. And, it's just miscommunication as well. So
that happens to me all the time. Yes. No, I love that you brought that up. Thank you so much for bringing that up, because it's true. It's so true that conversations that I've been needing to be had for years, and the emotional healing that you're going through, I appreciate you bringing it up, because it is very real. And I can see that, where someone's asking you a question and maybe you had already just had the conversation, or maybe you just don't want to have the conversation again. And the person asking doesn't know that, but it's okay. I think it is about understanding. First of all, like you said earlier, they need to do their own work. They need to kind of do their own research and figure out the answer sometimes before just going to someone who is maybe a Black person that they're like, oh, well, they'll know the answer. I'll just ask them. Well, maybe that's true, but at the same time, that's not fair to bombard you all the time, to constantly think, you're going to be the one to just like be the teacher about everything with, regards to race and equity and everything. That's not fair to have that all on your shoulders when you're dealing, like you said, with emotional trauma as well. So thank you for bringing that up I really appreciate that. And I love that we can have this open conversation. So any other things you want to say about that before we move on?
I think that extends to students as well. I think we have to remember that too, that extends to students. And oftentimes students don't have, we're not mixing with students on Facebook like that, right? And there's lots of conversations that kids are having amongst themselves, whether it's on Instagram or Snapchat or private messages on WhatsApp or whatever it is. I think it's important to remember that too. There's a lot of kids who are, experiencing emotional trauma and not having maybe the vocabulary at certain ages, not having the vocabulary to talk, and even older ages, not feeling like they want to talk, teenagers, teenagers.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yes.
Not wanting to talk at the best of times, let alone, when something's really troubling. So I think it's important in all that we do, that we move forward with respect and with open ears, with open hearts, because for many different reasons, people are suffering. Even if they haven't necessarily been affected by everything, the pandemic has been, a big deal for so many people. Even in conversations with other educators and then with students as well, understanding that, I think is really, really important.
Oh, yeah.
And I think, unfortunately, we're going to see the effects of all of this for years to come. Potentially, hope not, but there's kids who've been robbed of a year and a half of their social lives, at ages where they need to be around other students, other kids, and other teachers, other influences. Some kids who have been at home in abusive situations, for the last year and a half. And I think it's important to remember that. So just want to bring this flag up as well.
I can't imagine like what children are going through right now. I have 3 of my own, and we were blessed where our school stayed open. They just were mass to school. They did a great job about keeping the kids only with their class, spacing them out, all the things. But I know that is very rare across the world. Like that was not the, the situation. Most kids were online, and some kids did fine. And like you said, there's some kids who they need the social interaction. They have to. My oldest son is autistic, and so he has a lot of his learning is the social part of it. Like he has to. Luckily, he's blessed with 2 brothers, but his teacher was great about still doing, when we were home for whatever reasons, for doing Zoom calls and things to still keep him talking to his classmates and things. But yeah, the emotion, there's going to be so much, God, there's just so much trauma right now. Like you said, it's COVID, it's the racial things, the equity, and like talking about all of it. And so some kids are dealing with all of it. And it is, as a child, to be dealing with this, a lot of teaching music. And I've said this before, sometimes you're not going to be teaching music. And when I said that, I remember a music teacher looking at me like, what do you mean? And I said, well, what I mean by that is sometimes it's not about the teaching music. Music helps so much. And we know like why we teach music and why music education matters. But sometimes it is just listening to one of your students who you can tell just needs someone to listen to them that day. Sometimes it's having a conversation with your class about what they're seeing on TV, because I know there's certain people that say, don't bring that into the school building. But if the kids are needing to talk about it, you don't need to put your own opinion in there, but sometimes you can listen. Sometimes you can just be a shoulder to listen, and, they just need that. They need to know adults care for them and are there for them. And that, I cannot, and this is of course way before COVID, but years ago. But I remember there would be days I taught at a school that had a lot of trauma, and it was a lot of these kids would come to school with drive-by shootings the night before, or parents in jail. I mean, they dealt with so much stuff. And this was in Tulsa. So the Tulsa, race massacre stuff just came out like a couple weeks ago. And one thing that's made me angry is the fact that while I was teaching at this school, I was there 7 years, I didn't know about that. Nobody had mentioned it. It wasn't in any history books. It wasn't talked about even in the town I lived in, Tulsa. I was sitting in my bed the other night crying. And I remember just like emotions came out of different conversations I had maybe had with parents or students, or I even remember them talking about, like generational wealth, it was stopped from, because of that. Or no, they didn't continue the conversation. I just remember a parent saying one time, and now the generational wealth has stopped. And I remember why, like, I didn't understand. And then I'm seeing all these stories come out from my hometown street I drove by every day and had no idea. No idea. Nobody mentioned it. And so I'm sitting there like just angry, sad, upset, all these things of like, oh my gosh, this was my students' families. This is their families, and this is real. And a lot of them maybe heard stories from their parents or grandparents, but it was never talked about at school. And so I thought, how many more stories are there like that? Which I can't imagine, where there are so many stories where they're seeing real, human beings being killed on TV. But also, how many stories like that should be in history books or should be talked about and learned about, but they're not. And it made me so angry. This is kind of different, from whatever we had planned to talk about, but it was on my heart because I know it would have totally like helped me as a teacher to know about the history of my hometown I'm teaching in, and students coming from that neighborhood and not having any idea. It like literally like years later going, why did I not know?
But yeah, I think this kind of speaks to what is the purpose, not only what's the purpose of music education, right? Like what is the point of all this? And I think it also speaks to what is the point of school. What is school for? Is school to teach a certain things so that kids go away with certain skills or certain facts? Or is it a moving, living organism which learns alongside kids and moves with society? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because if it's, and I think this is what has happened, where school has become, you learn maths, you learn science, you learn geography, and you learn Spanish or whatever it is in these boxes, and you learn the same thing as the year before and 10 years ago, and you can use the same textbooks because nothing's changing. But when there's so much that is happening and shifting in communities, right? How are schools reflecting that, and how are they looking into the past and looking into their communities and the history of the communities and bringing that into school and helping kids understand? For some kids, it's helping them to understand why they're in this area in the first place, because they might not know.
Right.
There's the Windrush generation, which is if you ever kind of delved a little bit into British history, that's when the majority, this was the first kind of big wave of West Indian people who came over to the UK in it was 1948 when the first ship came over. And since then, there's been a lot that has happened to that generation. Even today, with lots of deportation been happening, it's a whole thing at the moment. But it's important for kids to understand, where they've come from, why they, with certain skin tones are in this country, and how they can start to make sense of how people might treat them, for better or for worse in some cases. And I think the thing about music is that I think we have an amazing opportunity to reach children on practical levels, when it comes to like composition and performance, to reach them on historical levels when we come to understanding where this music comes from, who made it, and emotional levels, even just by listening to music, listening to people who have made music about, Tulsa, made music about the Windrush, made music about Columbine, made music about, even like, the World Cup, and, just great things that are happening in the world.
Right.
And having the ability to stop and reflect. And just, I think music classrooms in schools can be that safe, emotional, joyous, reflective space that they might not get in other subjects. But I think it can be that space where everyone can find themselves and see themselves and come with their own personalities and know that the teachers can reach them on a level that, they can't bring to the history classes, they can't bring to the geography classes or the IT classes. The music that everyone, most people at least are listening to on a day-to-day basis. So this is what we're fighting for, isn't it?
Right.
At the end of the day.
Music class, I graduated with my music education degree with all the objectives to teach, the songs I could teach, what to teach to each grade level. But it was when I got in there and really started thinking, well, wait a minute, but like, I got to connect with these kids. I have to know like what they enjoy listening to as well. Music is not just about teaching the content. It's a connection point. It's the kids that feel like they can't succeed in other academic areas that can come in the music room and feel successful. It's so cool that you get to be the one to do that. And it's funny because I remember, and I've had so many conversations with music teachers who hear the same thing, like, how are you not having problem with whatever, insert the name? And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I just don't. Like, they just try for me. What? How? And I'm like, probably because they connect with music and maybe connect with what's going on, not just even with me, but I'm making my classroom feel like an open space for them to feel like they belong. And not that teacher wasn't, and maybe it was, math and the child didn't feel like they, could feel successful with math or whatever, but music I love it because it's a equal playing field where kids can feel like they belong and that they can feel successful. And it's just getting others to understand that, when music is like the first thing cut, you're like, if you would only get it, like this is where they need to be and where they're getting to feel the most like themselves. And so, it's frustrating when you hear about music programs cut all the time. In fact, my first job was walking into a situation, hadn't had music for 7 years. It was just sitting empty, this classroom. And I thought, how in the world? Like, what? Makes no sense to my brain, but that's a story for another day.
that's a whole thing though. I was really thinking about that the other day. Like, why is music often the first cut? Like, and when there's so much evidence for it, and I think the one thing that came to me, and I don't even know if I agree with my own thoughts, right? But I did wonder that, is it potentially because, governments and authorities, they know that music is going to be made regardless. So if the kids are going to make it anyway, then why have it in school? Because, people are still making music. They're making there's more music being made now than there ever has been in the history of the world, right? Just the output alone, right, of people being able to make stuff on their iPhones, make stuff in their homes, access to different instruments from different places, sound libraries. It's incredible what can happen you can do on a PC, on a Mac, right? And I just wonder sometimes, is the problem with music education that anyone can access it at any time? So let's put more money into the things that perhaps they can't access in that way. I don't know. I don't know if that's the truth or not, but it's quite sad, especially when we can see all the evidence that suggests why music is so important.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I've never thought about it that way, but I mean, maybe there's who knows what these lawmakers are thinking, like, why is it the first to go? And I know, like, you said at the beginning is the core subjects, which music is considered a core subject now. But I know in the US, it's math and reading especially are the ones in writing that are assessed, like that are the standardized test. And so it's like, you can't cut that, but it's like, well, you shouldn't be able to cut music either, but it is what it is. I know that's frustrating. But yeah, there's more work to be done there too, for sure. So for a music teacher listening right now, what is a first step they can take to work towards having more diversity in the songs and the literature that they teach?
I think, again, it just comes down to, wanting to do the work for yourself, wanting to find, it could be as simple as just putting the, maybe a Spotify or iTunes or whatever you use, and just listening to music that you don't normally listen to, and then, asking the students, what do you listen to, what you're interested in, having a list where you can write down some names, you go away, listen, and you can have conversations about music, about what they like. Even the other, I don't know how often it happens, but talking to other teachers in the school, the geography teacher, the maths teacher, the English teacher, Spanish teacher, what do you listen to? Because sometimes I think you can see, right? I don't know, at the end of the year, if you use Spotify, it gives you this list of, the stuff you listen to the most and everything, right? And I remember looking at mine and just thinking, gosh, there's stuff that I'm listening to all the time, like all the time. And it's the same songs, the same people all the time. I just think if I just took, if I listen to like 20 new artists a year, how many more different, ideas and influences I might have, right? So
true.
Maybe it's something, I was thinking about it actually, maybe doing something on my blog where like we kind of look at a different album a week, or something like that, from different places around the world. I don't know, maybe something like that, but that could even be, maybe that's a good resource to have so that people can dip in and out of something and just kind of talk about a few things, maybe relating it back to how you can introduce that kind of music to young people, etc. But yeah, I think when it comes to diversity, it is about just trying to get out there and asking people what they listen to and what they do, joining these Facebook groups, and there's people on Instagram doing great stuff too, and asking the questions about what you can do, where you can go. There's so much out there, so much out there, and hopefully there's more CPD sessions and workshops happening. I think FLAT are doing amazing things as well. So tuning into what they're doing, and yeah, so much out there.
Yeah, I love that you said, I mean, start simple. It can just be as simple as finding songs on Spotify. And I think that's where a lot of teachers stay stuck, is it's like, oh my gosh, I have to reinvent the wheel and come up with a whole new curriculum. And not necessarily, it's probably just change up. Start with one grade level and say, my goal is to add in something with this grade level. And then the next year, maybe add 2 grade levels and say, I'm going to add something to this grade level. Do your research. I am so amazed, like you said too, like there's so much out there for help. Like, I think it's incredible, because I know when I started, there was nothing. This was back in 2004. There was nothing to help with. No one asked questions to. I don't even think blogs. I think they maybe were just starting, but it wasn't anything music education really. I mean, there was a couple, but it wasn't anything that was helpful for what I needed. And it was just frustrating trying to do it on your own. And so the cool thing about today is there are so many places to go for help. You could just even go to Google and search in what you need to search for, and it'll point you to the different whatevers you need, But yeah, I love that, because it is about I think just starting with, like you said all along, what are your students interested in? What songs do they like to listen to? Maybe you can create a class Spotify playlist around that. Sure. Just adding in songs they like. And yes, then I know the comeback is, well, what if it's not school appropriate? Then, you listen to the instrumental track. There's, clean versions of songs usually, okay, or you can find one that's similar to that song. There's always workarounds for sure.
School appropriate, that whole thing. I struggle to understand that sometimes, because it's just that thing of, like, for example, like swear words, right? It's like, children already know them. 10-year-olds, they know what's going on. So if they were to hear it in the song, how much of a difference does that make, really? I mean, that might sound really like out there and controversial. I wonder, how much, and I think this is where hip hop suffers a lot, because there's a lot of amazing content, but the perception of maybe certain musicians, the culture, it's like, well, we can't engage with any of this music because there is some swearing, there is some this, there is that, so we can't, I think that happens sometimes in this country a lot as well. And also, again, it comes down to that diversity. So if you don't listen to that music and you don't really understand the culture of it, then there's no way you're going to bring it to your students. Like, why would you do that, right? And there is so much hip hop out there, that is school appropriate, age appropriate, child friendly, all of that stuff, right? With clean versions and everything. amazing histories, amazing people who have delved not just into hip hop, into R&B, into classical music, and crossover, and done many different things. So yeah, I just the age of the school appropriate thing
I
and
know.
stuff. I'm really curious about that, but
I
that's
think
more conversations to have, I think.
Well, I think sometimes there's roadblocks put up by administration where it's you probably would be okay playing certain songs in your classroom, but good and well, if the higher ups found out you're playing this song that maybe had a cuss word in it, it would not, that's the fear of just like sometimes there's like stipulations put on you about what you're allowed to do and not to do.
I think that again speaks to this idea of what is school, right? If it's not helping children to make sense of the world, right, then we're almost saying, well, certain things in school are allowed, and then there's the world out there, and you're going to have to figure that all out by yourself.
Yeah.
You're going to have to, you're literally on your own. Don't bring the politics in here. We don't deal with that.
Right. Yeah.
You figure it out, but they're children, and even adults, you're going to bring it in because it's just life. So if school isn't incorporating all of these things and being able and allowing kids to be critical, like listening critically and addressing issues and letting them ask the question, if there's swear words in this song, can I listen to it? Why should I listen to it? Why shouldn't I listen to it? And I wonder what children's responses to those would be different at different ages. Maybe you get some ages where they're like, no, I don't listen to it, and other ages where they're like, this is how my parents talk. I hear it more from my mom and dad than I hear it in this music. It doesn't affect me.
When being a music class, it's music. There's sometimes this like separation between what the kids listen to at home or in their car on the way home from school versus the music I'm going to teach them in my classroom. But there needs to be a connection formed between, it's all music, it's music. And so I think there's a lot of times kids like, this is music class music, and this is music I learn at home or outside of music class. It's like, there at some point needs to be a like, meshing of the two where kids see the connection of this is all music, and we're in music class to learn about music, but the ins and outs of it and the why behind it. And so that's why it's super important to bring popular music into your classroom, because the kids need to be able to form connections. And so how else will they be able to do that?
This is what hurts. I think what hurts, Black and brown kids the most, in my opinion, where the music of their cultures, isn't in school.
Yep.
So, how that might make you feel as, someone from, from a particular tribe, a Native American tribe, or, your family might be from Haiti or wherever your family's from. And, your music is totally separate to what happens in school. So what perceptions are you forming about not only the music in school, but the music that you experience outside, where you could just, and I think many children do, almost reject what they get in school and say, well, that's my teacher, and and they're X years old, and this is for them, it's not for me. I don't care about this stuff, and I gravitate to everything I do outside. Or they might start to look at the music that they have at home and think, well, it's not worthy of being in school, and I value school, and so maybe I choose to reject the stuff that I listen to at home or my parents listen to, and you know what I mean. And there's so many, and then it starts to get into a class issue, I think, where you might see, you might associate your school and your teachers as being maybe a different social class to you, different affluence to you, and you see what happens at home, where there might be poverty at home, there might be so many different issues that are happening. And so you start to reject all of the culture that happens at home in favor of what happens in school, right? And that can lead to problems in the future. So, and how you see yourself, especially. So, there's so much to kind of unpack on that. But what the children listen to outside, and what they're being exposed to and studying and learning about in school, and how different it can be, and if it continues to be different, how people start to see music education, and do they go on to study music at university? Maybe not, or college, maybe not. Do they pick up an instrument? Maybe not. But then they might do it outside, and then I'm sure there's so many teachers who have listened, who have seen some of their kids do amazing things on YouTube or whatever, and think, I never knew you could sing like this. I never knew you could play like this. But the environment in school isn't set up for you to come in and feel like you can share your culture, or can share your ability playing I don't know, playing flamenco because we don't do that here,
Yeah.
you know, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah. One of my favorite things to do with planning is I would plan what was called Fun Friday. And it would be where maybe not the full class period if I still had things to get through, but maybe the last like 10, 15 minutes, students would take turns sharing like kind of like a mini talent show in a way, but singing in their
Mhm.
favorite song or playing a certain instrument or showing us a dance. It Gosh, talk about fostering community in your classroom. These students getting to see what they and how they enjoy experiencing music from each other was so neat. And they looked forward to it so much. And it's also just a great classroom management tip because if you want your kids to focus through the week, and be like, hey, if you want that fun Friday, get it together.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and teachers listening, I want to encourage you. Maybe you're like, well, how do I begin exploring what music my students like? Nate already mentioned it. Just listen to go on Spotify. Just say, today I'm going to pick a new artist. It could be someone you've never heard. Go to a certain genre and say, click there and say, it'll tell you new and upcoming artists and
Mhm.
click on that person and just say, I'm going to listen to a song by this person. Or maybe you're in your car on your way home and just I did this, make an effort to go to the hip hop station and say, I'm just going to kind of listen to this. Or maybe a student that day has pointed out one of their favorite songs and you maybe have never heard of it. And you're going to, that day on the way home, you're going to find it on your phone and you're going to listen to it on the way home.
Mhm.
This goes back to doing your own research. It doesn't have to just be about doing your own research when it comes to curriculum, but also just do your research about what your students like and how you can bring that into your classroom. Just start by listening to the songs. And I know for me personally, just from listening to music, I get so many ideas like, oh my gosh, that would be perfect to teach this rhythm, or this would be perfect to tie into a composition unit, or whatever it might be. But just start by listening to music and, you'll get so many ideas from there. So that is a tip for you. When you're trapped in the car, listen to music as much as, different styles and genres of music as you can. Nate, I want you to tell us about the books you've written because I know you told me 5 and they're
Mhm.
all incredible. And so I want you to share about your books and what was your heart behind writing them and how did you decide to write the next one and the next one and the next one?
um, okay, so the first one was I wish I didn't quit music lessons, and the idea behind that was, from personal experience of playing the piano and doing, we have grades over here, right, and a lot of classical music, and just feeling really frustrated and quitting it at the end of the day when I was about 13 years old or so, 14 years old, and realizing that that experience is very, very common. There's so many kids who start playing an instrument and then they quit, and not only do they quit, but they maybe they're 16, 17, 18, 20, 25, 30, 40, and they say, oh, you know what, I wish it continued. I wish I didn't quit
Mm-hmm.
playing this instrument or that instrument, because imagine where I'd be now, not even necessarily being a superstar or anything like that, but I just love to be able to play my favorite song, on the guitar or on the piano or recorder or saxophone or whatever it is. So that was the reason behind writing that, really giving parents and teachers some tips, some ideas about how to foster love, how their children can really fall in love with music, and getting them to listen, again, talking about diversity, listen to a diverse range of music, and exploring different people who have done weird and wonderful things on their instruments, not the traditional violin, so you have to be a concert violinist, but looking at people like Karen
Mm-hmm.
Briggs, for example, and who played on many like hip hop tracks, as a violinist, and other people who from around the world who have used the violin in many different ways. So that was the thinking behind that, and then the 4 that came out recently. So we had Why Is My Piano Black and White, which is a reference book all about the piano for kids. Just recognizing again that when kids are learning these instruments, oftentimes, they might not be able to tell you much about the history of the instrument. Can they name a few musicians who, piano players? I definitely couldn't, as a kid,
Mm-hmm.
couldn't tell you anybody. But so this book goes through, classical music and blues and hip hop and jazz and pop and different genres, and gives you bios of different people. And there's a Spotify playlist attached that you can listen to all of this music
Oh,
from all these different
awesome.
people as well. And then there's a book called Where Are All the Black Female Composers? Again, speaking to the idea of diversity and giving kids again, small bios of different Black female composers, classical composers who have made incredible music, all the way people from Nora Holt to Florence Price to people who are still alive now, people like Cassie Kanoshi, Erilyn Wallen, Hannah Kendall, who are making incredible music to this day, so that they get an idea. And sort of many people are out there who don't know about these women, maybe there's some kids out there who look and see, okay, a composer doesn't have to be, a middle-aged white guy. It can be someone who looks like me, right?
Yeah.
And again, playlists attached to that book too that you can access on Spotify. Awesome. And a book that came out for little kids, for like 3 to 6 year olds, called Where Are All the Instruments? And it's just a fun little adventure exploring instruments of the European orchestra, for kids, and with 4 characters who come from different places around the world. And the basic premise of the book is there's an orchestra, they're going to play a concert, but then all the instruments are missing when they open up all the cases, and the kids go around different places. They're in space, they're underwater, finding these different instruments, bringing them back, and then the orchestra plays at the end for their audience. And there's an activity book attached to that book as well, so kids can color in these instruments, and there's a couple of dot dots and a little crossword, and encouraging literacy and numeracy, so counting the different instruments and writing them down, and tracing the names of different instruments like gongs and violins and violas, so that kids are also developing that, just the fine motor skills that they need, in later life. So those are the books that I have out at the moment, and hopefully more to come in the next few years.
So cool. It's just so cool. And these books are so needed. So teachers, get yourself a copy. And before we go, I'm going to have Nate tell you where you can find them. But before we do you have any last minute, or I guess not last minute, but any other advice about anything we talked about or did not talk about today for music teachers?
Honestly, I think, we all, and I include myself in this, have to think about where we come from, who we are, our experiences, and reflect on that and see how we can all do better. I think that's just the bottom line, honestly, for everybody, to think about where we come from, and the music that we enjoy and why we enjoy it, and how we can bring ourselves into teaching, or if we're talking to teachers, how we bring ourselves to teachers, to middle-aged people, to babies. How do we, how many of us teachers, right, have taught things that we actually have no personal affection for, so how can we insert ourselves? Because I think children, they see when you're enthusiastic about something. So how can we kind of shift the idea of what it means to teach music into something which benefits kids, benefits ourselves, and then ultimately benefits society, so that hopefully we can have less shootings, less. I wonder, if we learn about different people and their cultures and who they are as people from early ages, how much hate that would potentially stop, how many random killings that would stop, how many hate crimes that would stop from people actually seeing people from Haiti, or people from wherever it is in the world, as people with long-standing histories and cultures, as opposed to just people who the media might say are coming and taking your jobs, right? So I think I'd encourage everyone just to do that. Just think about where you come from, who you are, and how you can bring yourself into this amazing thing called music.
Oh, I love that. So good. So Nate, where can everybody connect with you and find you online, including where can they find all of your amazing books?
Easy and simple. So nateholdermusic.com is my website. On there, you'll find a bunch of blogs and a few resources here and there, and also my books. And if you want to just look for the books, there is a site set up called thewhybooks.co.uk. You can find all the books, plus there's posters and there's t-shirts and there's a mug as well. And on social media, just simply N8 holder on Twitter and on Instagram as well. And that's where you'll find me.
Perfect. Teachers, do yourself a favor and connect with Nate. Go get yourself a copy of not just one, but all of the books, because they're amazing. And Nate, I appreciate you coming on today. This conversation has been amazing, and I appreciate you coming on the podcast. Thank you.
No problem. It's been long overdue. I'm really grateful that we're able to do this.
I know it's nice when you meet your online friends and then you finally connect face to face, still virtually, but you see each
Yeah.
other's faces, not just like each other's Instagram post or whatever.
Those pictures, yeah, that's right.
Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Well, hey there. Thank you so much for listening into the Elementary Music Teacher podcast. There is an exclusive Facebook group just for listeners of this podcast and any elementary music teacher called the Elementary Music Teacher Community Facebook group. Come on over and join us there where we have conversations around the podcast episodes and encourage each other each and every week. And also head to my website, thedomesticmusician.com. I have some free resources there that you can download to help you gain traction in your classroom today, as well as the blog and the membership site and all kinds of other goodies to help you keep going in your music teaching journey. I cannot wait to keep connecting with you and encouraging you and spurring you on in your journey of teaching elementary music. Hang in there, have an amazing week, and I will see you soon.